Welcome to the Hugh project. I'm Hugh, and in this video we'll be removing the right-hand side cover on my XR400 and inspecting the oil strainer at the bottom of the engine and the one in the frame at the front of the bike. The XR250 and XR600 are also similar, so this applies to them as well. Whenever you buy a bike, it's always worth inspecting these. I've seen them clogged up with all sorts of muck and bits of gasket and bits of metal as well, sometimes to the point where they wouldn't be flowing oil healthily. So it's always worth checking and cleaning them out if needed. While we're in there, we'll also replace some of the seals and the gasket around the outside, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So let's dive in. To get to the oil strainer in the base of the engine, we'll remove the entire right-hand side cover as one piece. That way we don't need to remove the clutch cover separately and won't need to replace the gasket for that. To do this, these are the bolts that we'll need to remove. I'll list the part numbers in the description as well, but these are the items that I would normally replace. The right-hand side cover gasket is the main one you'll need, and then while we're in there, I like to replace the seal for the end of the crank, and also the kickstarter shaft seal. But for this one you'll need to make sure you order the correct part number for your year model of bike, because the 96 to 98 model XR400s had a smaller kickstarter shaft than the 99 onwards models. Then on the oil pump we have the oil pump to case seal, and on the oil cooler diagram we have the two O-ring seals for the oil hoses to the outside of the case. And that's it for parts. So now to get started, we need to drain the oil using both the engine sump plug and the one in the frame. You don't need to remove the tank and seat like I have here, I just happen to be doing some other work on the bike at the same time. Next we need to remove the right hand foot peg, the kickstarter and the rear brake pedal. These need an Allen key and often an extension bar as well because they're on there pretty tight. But on this bike they were so tight that I ended up needing to get the impact driver to get them off. Then use a 12mm socket to remove the kickstarter bolt. This needs to be completely removed for it to come off the shaft. Sometimes this can be pretty hard to get off, so a small screwdriver to get in the gap and spread it a little bit can help get it off as well. And now the pin to the rear master cylinder needs to be removed. There's a split pin on the back that you'll need to undo first. Once the legs are straight, you can use a screwdriver in the end to hammer it out, and then a pair of pliers from the front can pull the pin out. Now the brake light rod and the brake lever return spring need to be removed. And then for the pedal itself, there's another split pin or clip at the back that needs to be removed to allow it to come out. You may still have the original factory clip that looks like this, but in many cases it's been replaced with a split pin. A screwdriver from the back can help push the pin legs straight, and then a pair of needle nose pliers can help pull it out. Then we can begin to ease the washers off and the pedal out. Just be sure not to drop the washers, there may be two separate washers there. Then we can continue to pull the pedal out from the front, being careful that the little shaft seal may fall out from the back when you're doing this. This one was in there pretty tight. And you can see here that the front shaft seal has come out as well with this. And on this bike you'll see someone's made a little aluminium sleeve to reduce the slack in the pedal, and they've done the same for the master cylinder pin. It's also worth having a look in the frame side. You'll want to clean this out and put new grease in there, and if the seals were damaged you want to replace them too. Lastly, so they don't get in the way, you want to remove the brake light rod and spring, just noting how they're configured so you can put them back. And now to the front of the bike, we need to disconnect both oil hoses and completely remove the lower one so we can get to the oil strainer in the frame. Once you get the hose off, you'll find a dowel and an O-ring around the outside. This is one of the O-rings that I like to replace. Once you get the lower hose off, note that there's a washer either side of the fitting. And now we can remove the frame strainer itself. You'll see this one's actually pretty clean apart from this one little piece of metal here, but we'll still give it a thorough wash and clean. And after washing that, it's all ready to go back in, and then torqued up to 54 Newton meters. For the next part, it helps to hold this oil hose back with a cable tie, just being careful not to bend the flexible part too far. And now we'll remove the clutch cable mount and remove the end piece from the bracket. We can then tuck this into the cable tie we used earlier. And now everything is clear, ready to remove the side cover. Before removing the bolts, I like to make a template from a gasket. This way we can remember where all the bolts go. And since we've already removed the clutch cable bracket bolts, we can put them in their correct spots. And then for the bolt removal, we'll refer to this diagram that I showed earlier. Loosen these in a crisscross pattern and then remove them all. Once these are removed, you can then dislodge the front cover using the tabs on the cover at these locations. For this, I like to use a long metal rod that will reach from the other side. A few taps at each of these points in a rotation is the best way to do this so it comes off evenly. And once it starts to come loose, you'll hear the sound of the taps change. Then before removing the side cover, it's important to note that the clutch arm needs to be rotated to disengage it from the pin, otherwise the side cover won't come off. You can see here how the spindle has a notch and two pieces of metal that hook onto that pin, and unless it's rotated back, it won't release from the pin. And you can see the pin here. So now back to the side cover removal. Once you start to get a bit of movement in it, then we can rotate this clutch arm to release it from the pin. As you remove the side cover, make sure to push the kickstarter shaft back in repeatedly so that it doesn't come out and dislodge the kickstarter return spring. And then the cover should slide right off. You'll notice that the clutch arm return spring actually fell off here, and if that happens, it's not too hard to put back on. There's a slot at the bottom for the lower leg of the spring, and then a little hole at the top that the top leg of the spring goes into. On the side cover, the items we'll be replacing are the oil pump to side cover seal, the end of the crank seal, and on the other side, the kickstarter shaft seal. Be sure to also get the little washer on the back side of the kickstarter shaft hole. I like to place that back on the kickstarter shaft. You'll also see here the kickstarter spring I was mentioning earlier. If that comes dislodged, just place its leg back in this hole. And now here you can see the engine oil strainer that we'll be removing via this bolt. But first I like to clean up around the outside, so we'll remove the dowels. There's one over to the left here that a bolt goes through, and then another one over to the right that's just a pin. And now we'll remove the gasket from around the outside. Sometimes these can be really baked on there and quite a task to remove, so the gentler you go at this point, the more material you might get off in the first go and the less cleaning and scraping you'll have to do later. And now it's time to remove the oil strainer. In the workshop manual, they recommend using a high flash point solvent to wash this with. Undo the bolt with a 10mm socket, and then you can slide the strainer out. Any debris will always be on the bottom because that's the side it filters from, and you can see here there's a few pieces of metal and gasket and stuff here. This one's actually not too bad. I've seen much worse than this on other bikes. This was one of my other XR400s I did recently, and you can see this is a bit worse. Not really what you want in your engine. So after giving it a good wash with a high flash point solvent, I'll then blow it out with compressed air. Then before putting it back in, you want to check the engine side as well. There's often little pieces of metal in the underneath side of this. While this engine's not too bad, you can see that one of the other bikes I did recently had a fair bit more in here too. I found a long small screwdriver fairly good at getting this out. And once that's clean, then you can reinstall the oil screen and secure it back in place with the bolt. While they don't specify a torque spec in the manual, I like to do this fairly tight without stripping it, of course, but you could also use Loctite if you wanted. While we've got the side cover off, I also like to inspect everything like the cam chain and the shifter star, make sure that the kickstarter shaft is in properly, check the clutch plates and the bearing, And then it's time to clean the gasket surface so we can reassemble. For this part, I like to put shop towels over all the internals to avoid getting any gasket pieces in there. These should be shop towels that don't leave any fibres or lint behind. It's also important to make sure you don't get anything in these little oil holes either. For cleaning the gasket surface, I like to use a really sharp razor and just be extremely careful to keep it straight and level. That way you can gently scrape off the pieces and keep it flat to the surface. There are also other tools that people like to use, but regardless of what you use, it's very important not to damage the gasket surface in any way, otherwise you'll have trouble getting it to seal again. For this part, it's worthwhile just taking your time and being patient and expecting that it may take some time. I've had some gaskets that have left lots on there and they've taken me hours to do. Once that's done, the next step is to clean the side cover, firstly by removing the oil pump to side cover seal and cleaning that surface, and then cleaning the gasket surface around the outside in the same way. With the gasket surface cleaned, then clean out the inside of the side cover. There can often be all sorts of oily grime in here and pieces of the gasket that we just removed as well. Now that's clean, we can replace the crank end seal. Use a pair of circlip pliers to remove the circlip, and then before removing the seal, make sure that your replacement seal matches what's in there, and then remove the old seal. I usually use a flat screwdriver and just make sure I don't damage the surface behind it. I'll get the screwdriver right in under the outside edge of the seal and then lever it out and it should come out. And then for driving the new seal in, I'll find a socket or seal driver that fits just inside the hole, add a bit of oil to the new seal, seat it in position, and then tap it in with the seal driver, making sure that you're only tapping to the furthest outside part of the seal so you don't damage the seal area. And then I'll install the circlip again and make sure the inside area of the seal is lubed, ready for when we put it back on the engine. Next, we'll remove the Kickstarter shaft seal. You can press this out just using a screwdriver from the back. Once this is removed, you can either replace it now or later once the side cover's back on the engine. So even though I'll show how you can install it now, I personally recommend installing it once the cover's back on the engine, because sometimes when you're installing the cover, the kickstart shaft can interfere with the seal and roll the inside of the seal out, damaging the spring in the back of it. So now that we've made it this far, all the hard work is done and it's time for reassembly. To start with, we'll install the dowels back in the engine. I like to dip them in a little bit of oil first to help them go in easier and not seize up later. The solid dowel goes over in the top right corner, and the one with the hole for the bolt to go through goes in the upper left corner. And now we can prepare the side cover gasket. To make sure that this doesn't bake on and become really hard to get off, I like to put a really thin coating of grease on it. Just be especially careful not to bend or kink the gasket because they can break pretty easily, and I have had that happen before. Once that's done, just make sure you clean thoroughly around the top area where the oil channels are. You don't want any buildup of grease there that will get in the oil passageways. And then carefully place the gasket onto the engine, gently easing it over the two dowels, and then also the stud at the bottom. And just make sure that it's seated all around the surface. Now we'll install the oil pump to side cover gasket on the oil pump. Put a bit of oil on this and it will also help it stick to the oil pump. And then give the top surface of the gasket around the oil channels a final clean. To install the side cover, we need to reverse the removal process where we'll start with the clutch arm open, and then once it's in place, we can then rotate it around to engage the pin. So this is where, as we go to face the cover up to the engine, we want to check that everything's in place, including the spring, and that as we open the clutch arm, the teeth move away so that it'll slide over the pin. Now, as you place the cover on, if you chose to install a kickstart shaft seal already, this is where you want to be really careful that it doesn't roll the seal out. So just ease it very gently over and wiggle the cover a bit as you go to make sure that it moves easily over the shaft. and then keep the cover as straight as possible and ease it onto the dowels. It may take a bit of fiddling, and just make sure that the clutch arm is still open so that it can go over the pin. And then you should feel it all push into place, and you'll feel the clutch arm now can rotate and bite onto the clutch pin. And then just give the cover a few taps to make sure it's fully seated. And that's on. If you'd chosen not to install the kickstart shaft seal yet, now's the time you can install that. Just make sure it's well lubricated, and then very gently ease it on over the splines while rotating it a bit to make sure that you don't roll the inner part of the seal out. And then just gently press it into its housing. To drive it home the last bit, a large long socket can do the trick. Just make sure that you only tap towards the outside edges of the seal so you don't damage the inner seal area. And now it's time to install the cover bolts. When removing them from the cardboard template, just make sure you blow off any bits of cardboard that might be on the threads. I like to use a tiny bit of anti-seize on the threads as well, just to make sure they don't seize up later. During this part, you can also now install the clutch cable back into the clutch arm and the bolts into the bracket for that. And then once they're all installed and your cardboard template is empty, go around and tighten all the bolts evenly in a crisscross pattern. While they don't specify a torque spec for these in the manual, the usual torque spec for bolts this size is between 9 and 12 Newton meters. Then you can cut the cable tie to the oil hose and we'll install both oil hoses. This is where I like to install new O-rings onto the dowels, adding a bit of oil to them first, and then install the dowel into the hole and the oil hose fitting over the top. Repeat this for the other one. And then to install the lower hose, thread the front bolt into the frame tube first, and then tighten the bolts firmly. Lastly, we'll tighten the front bolt and torque it to 37 Newton meters. Now's also a good time to replace the oil filter with a new one, making sure you oil the rubber seal and then place the flat closed part against the spring in the engine. Depending on its condition, you may also want to replace the O-ring on the cover, and then line the cover up into the hole on the front of the filter. Next, install the brake pedal with new grease in the frame and shaft, and then the washers on the back with a new split pin, being sure to bend the legs of the split pin around to keep it secure. Then install the pin to the master cylinder, also with a new split pin. And then make sure it operates correctly without binding. Reinstall the two springs, referring to any photos you took beforehand if needed, and then check that the pedal returns correctly and the brake light switch just activates as you push the pedal down. Reinstall the kickstart lever, making sure it lines up on the splines correctly to be in the right position, and then install the foot peg arm. I'd recommend putting some anti-seize on the threads for these just to make sure they don't seize up in future. Lastly, refill the oil. You may find that this takes closer to the disassembly amount of 2.2 litres. It's also worth doing a final check, making sure the clutch cable's adjusted right, the Kickstarter works correctly, the foot peg is done up tight, and the brake lever works. And then this process is done. If this was helpful, please hit the like button. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.